Good morning to one and all. On behalf of Institutions Innovation Council and MIT Center for Future Skills Excellence, MIT Art, Design and Technology University, I welcome you to the National Intellectual Property Convention 2022. At the outset, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our guest speakers for today, Dr. Kishore Srinivasan sir, Dr. Anindya Sarkar sir, Professor Prabuddha Ganguly sir, Dr. Sheetal Chopra ma'am, Dr. Patnala Sri Ramchandra Murthy sir, Dr. Vijay Kumar Sahu sir, Sri Vivek Dahiya sir. Our mentor and guide, Honorable Professor Dr. Mangesh Karat sir, Executive President and Vice Chancellor, MIT Edith University. Our valuable advisors, Professor Dr. Anand Chakradev sir, Dr. Mahesh Chopre sir, Professor Dr. Virendra Bhojwani sir, Professor Suraj Bhayar sir. I also welcome all the deans, directors, heads of departments of MIT Edith University, and the participants who took out their valuable time to listen to these stalwarts in intellectual property domain. We have a plethora of insightful sessions for you today. Do attend them all, and I'm sure it will add up to your IP knowledge manifold. The schedule is on your screen. Before we start, the usual practice of MIT Art, Design and Technology University is to seek blessings before any auspicious beginning. I hence request you to join your hands for the World Peace Prayer. This prayer is unique as it's above any caste or creed. May I request the technical team to play the World Peace Prayer, please.
वेद प्रतिपाद्या जय जय स्वसंवेद्या आत्मरूपा देवातुति गणेषु सकलार्थमति प्रकाशु म्हणे निवृत्तिदासु अवधारि गोदी गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Thank you. The Government of India has launched a National Intellectual Property Awareness Mission as part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav initiative with the goal of raising awareness about intellectual property and its rights. The importance of a strong intellectual property ecosystem in the country's advancement has grown exponentially, especially now since India is emerging as the new startups hub. As the world celebrates World Intellectual Property Day today, let us explore IP ecosystem, its framework, and raise awareness on its importance with experts of IP here. To know more about the National Intellectual Property Convention 2022, we have with us Professor Suraj Bhayar sir, Project Director and the Project Director of MIT Center for Future Skills Excellence and Vice President, Institution Innovation Council. He's a passionate digital evangelist at MIT ADT University, a postgraduate in mechanical engineering, patents law, and educational administration. He's keen to develop an ecosystem for nurturing skills development as well as employability. His dynamic role in getting future skills training for career aspirants make him confident to build an enterprising and innovative India. He dreams to reshape the lives of students and working professionals via excellence in future exponential technologies, which will have a strong technological impact in tomorrow's economy. With an exponential learning curve and amazing networking skills, his dream is to lead the Ministry of Higher and Technical Education for better industry-institute interaction ecosystem development. May I request Sir to deliver the welcome address, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Deva Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Sri Guruve Namah. Very good morning to all the students, research scholars, teachers, faculty members, education facilitators, nation builders, and my dear friends. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all for the inaugural ceremony of the National Intellectual Property Convention 2022. This is an immensely exciting morning for Institutions Innovation Council, MIT Art, Design and Technology University Pune, India. The active participation of all the delegates across India and even abroad affirms the relevance and meaningfulness of this celebration today. I wish everyone happy World Intellectual Property Day. My dear friends, young people all over the world are rising to the challenge of innovation, applying their energy, inventiveness, curiosity, and imagination to chart a road for a brighter future. Innovative, active, and creative brains are assisting in the implementation of the necessary reforms to move forward towards a great sustainable future. And every year, on April 26th, World Intellectual Property Day is being commemorated with variety of initiatives, events, and activities around the globe. Its goals are to raise IP awareness, knowledge, and comprehension, as well as to encourage innovation and creativity. This national convention is going to be a synergy of valuable information, insights, knowledge, supplemented with the thought-provoking keynote sessions and engagement on recent IPR issues and trends under the guidance of IP leaders and practitioners. My dear friends, MIT Art, Design and Technology University Pune is a place where innovation and creativity coexist. The university has a robust research, innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, and it's always looking into the possibilities of creating an IP-intensive environment across the stakeholders. Team Institutions Innovation Council emphasize and strengthen innovation-led entrepreneurship to boost value addition, competitiveness, and transformation of ideas, and thereby building an enterprising India for a new world. MIT ADT University pursues this type of initiatives like conferences, convention for key stakeholders as one of its primary objectives. And this is very timely initiative curated by the team Institutions Innovation Council, along with MIT Center for Future Skills Excellence and AIC MIT ADT Incubator Forum to build a creative India and innovative India. With this, let me first acknowledge the presence of our eminent guest today. It is indeed our pleasure to have amongst us the chief guest of today's inaugural ceremony, Honorable Shri Dr. Kishore Srinivasan, Director and Head, CSIR Unit for Research and Development of Information Products, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, Government of India. We welcome you, sir. I also take immense pleasure to welcome our Honorable Executive President and Vice Chancellor of MIT ADT University, Professor Dr. Mangesh Karat, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for gracing the occasion. Your presence is indeed a source of inspiration to all of us. I would also like to welcome Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor of MIT ADT University, Professor Dr. Anant Chakradev, sir. I am also glad to welcome Honorable Professor Dr. Sunita Karad, ma'am, Director ICT and MITCOM, Dean Faculty of Management. I am taking this opportunity to also welcome Dr. Mahesh Chopre, Registrar of MIT ADT University, Professor Dr. Virendra Bhojwani, President, Institutions Innovation Council and Associate Dean, Research and Consultancy Cell, and the Convener of National Intellectual Property Convention. We are also indeed delighted to welcome all the deans, directors, principals, HOIs, HODs, faculty members, and all the delegates from different parts of the world. All the representatives of IIC, MIT Fuse, AIC, MIT Incubator Forum, MIT School of Holistic Development, and all the members of organizing committee. I welcome our esteemed delegates and members on the virtual platform of MIT University. We are thankful to you for joining us today. My dear friends, just to conclude, we had received an overwhelming response of more than 300 plus registrations from the convention across India. April 26, World Intellectual Property Day, this year celebrates youth-led innovation and creativity for a better future. And recently, we observed record levels of IP filings in India, IP regime. And for the first time, my dear friends, in last 11 years, the number of patents filed by the resident Indians at Indian Patent Office has overtaken the number of patents filed by non-resident Indians. And in Global Innovation Index, India jumped from 62nd to 46th. And we have the potential to radically change the global innovation landscape for good. So let's celebrate World Intellectual Property Day. And definitely today, it will reach to new heights with your kind support and aid. So once again, on behalf of the team, MIT University Pune, I congratulate each one of you for taking a great step ahead and to learn more about intellectual property rights with the motto of listen, learn, and live. Without further ado, let's listen to Sri Dr. Kishore Srinivasan sir on IP value, a Patinformatics perspective, and learn how intellectual property rights can help tomorrow's youngsters build a better world. I once again welcome you to this inaugural session, and these few words, I wish every success, and I am confident that you will apply and implement the insights and knowledge to make your IP journey the most rewarding experience for young India. I am really grateful to the organizing team for giving me this opportunity to extend the welcome address. Jai Hind, thank you. Over to you, Smriti.
Thank you so much, sir. You have set the perfect note to today's informative event. Thank you so much for being there. Friends, we are honored to have with us Dr. Kishore Srinivasan, sir, Director and Head, CSIR, Unit for Research and Development of Information Products, one of the specialized national centers of excellence in diverse streams of intellectual property analytics and informatics located in Pune. After securing his doctorate degree in physics from IIT Madras in 1998 and a brief stint as staff scientist at the Center for Materials for Electronics Technology, Dr. Srinivasan sir was elected for postdoctoral research fellowship at the Pennsylvania State University, the University of California, San Diego, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the United States to work on diverse fundamental and applied aspects of nanoscale materials physics and energy storage. Subsequent to his postdoctoral tenures, he joined General Electric Global Research Center, Bangalore, as lead intellectual property specialist, driving patent analytics and Patinformatics programs across key advanced technology platforms in GE, wherein he acquired frontline training in diverse streams of patent analytics, IP risk assessments, competitive intelligence, and IP due diligence. Subsequently, he moved on to the Global Institute of Intellectual Property, Bangalore, as program director, framing and driving both in-house IP training sessions for entry-level patent analysts and patent engineers and customized external IP training programs for corporate and industrial IP professionals and practitioners. He held office as head intellectual property Thermax Limited, Pune, driving their intellectual property function and activities across technology and business verticals in India and overseas. Dr. Srinivasan holds a patent information specialist certification from WON Netherlands and has acquired extensive training in United States patent practice from the Patent Resources Group, Virginia, USA. He has to his credit a Master of Laws degree in Innovation, Technology, and a law from the University of Edinburgh, UK, and a certificate in Intellectual Asset Management from Chicago Kent College of Law, Illinois Institute of Technology, United States. He has been a mentor to several entry-level students for aspiring patent engineer roles, as well as entry-level and mid-career level patent professionals through internal and external corporate training programs and workshops all over India and overseas. He has delivered and invited as guest lecturers at numerous national and international conferences and workshops within India and overseas on diverse aspects of intellectual property law and the niche discipline of patent informatics. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including GE Management Award for Outstanding IP Analytics, Landscaping, and Road Mapping activities for various advanced technology programs across GE, the Inventor Incentive Award instituted by the Penn State Research Foundation for fundamental and applied research on nanoparticulate hydrogen storage materials, and the Boys Cast National Research Fellowship awarded by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. We are indeed honored to have you, sir.
Good morning to you all. Distinguished speakers on the dais, Dr. Suraj Boyer and organizers of this National IP Convention from MIT ADT University, deans, directors, leadership of MIT ADT University, and members of the faculty at MIT ADT University, dear students and friends. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for having me on this panel of speakers at this National IP Convention on the occasion of World IP Day 2022. My opening pitch to you today would be on IP value and valuable IP, which are both widely discussed these days and which I believe should be the most central and sought after goal or objective of any science, technology, or innovation endeavor or enterprise in the present times. This seems all the more relevant against the background theme set by WIPO for the World IP Day this year, which is IP and Youth, Innovating for a Better Future. This slide gives a broad outline of my intended session. Given the time constraints and the scope of the half-day deliberations, I would be giving you only a broad or a brief overview of a few guiding tenets, thought processes, and practices for realizing IP value, primarily employing the tools of Patinformatics, the primary forte of my organization, CSIR Urudim. Given the varying levels of IP training and awareness of the audience, I will also touch upon a few basic aspects as we go along. However, I would also like to caution you all that this is by no means a recipe or a prescription for IP value. What I have sought to give would only be broad guidelines, indicators, or enablers of IP value that need to be brought into our structured thought processes and understanding at various stages as we embark on IP creation through the course of our R&D or technology development activities. As we all realize, the WIPO theme for the year is primarily intended to celebrate youth-led innovation and creativity. As mentioned by WIPO, the primary motivation and exhortation of this theme is to tap the innovative, energetic, and creative young minds of our country to drive positive, game-changing, and disruptive trends and paradigms in the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem of our country. This is in order to bring in a more sustainable future for generations. These will essentially entail creation of new technologies, new markets, new business models, new benchmarks, new industry standards, and new scorecards, bringing in new, intangible intellectual assets to the country. Further, the theme also envisions an opportunity for young people to find out how IP rights can support their goals, help transform their ideas into reality, and generate income, create jobs, and make a positive impact on the world around them and its economy. We all live in a knowledge-driven economy, when and where science, technology and innovation are the engines of economic growth of any country. As a currency in a knowledge-driven economy and the scorecard of technology and innovation, intellectual property forms an intangible asset of any organization or company and has economic value attached to it. The value of IP lies in its techno-legal instrumentality and enforceability. It is this realization that is vital to the youth of India at this juncture. The need of the hour is to instill and nurture in young scientists and technologists an awareness in IP, its fundamentals, its implications, its value proposition, and the means to realize, protect, and manage IP, and leverage or extract the value of IP through its value life cycle, all the way from ideation and IP capture through IP filing and IP protection, culminating in IP valorization or monetization, well within the statutory frameworks of the IP laws and the rules prevailing in our country. In this slide, I have sort of tried to summarize a few quick statistics and numbers on the recent patent filings in India during the last quarter of the last financial year. The trends and information presented here are adapted from the Press Information Bureau, the Business Standard, and the Economic Survey 2022. As evident from the data here, out of the total 19,796 Indian patent filings during January to March 2022, the number of filings by Indian applicants comes to 10,706, which is approximately 54% of the total, exceeding the number of filings by non-resident applicants, which comes to almost 9,090. This has happened for the first time in 11 years. Further, there has been a 50% increase in the number of patent filings from 42,763 during 2014-15 to 66,440 during 2021-22, and a five-fold rise in the number of patent grants from 5,974 during 2014-2015 to 30,074 during 2021-22. The average patent examination times in Indian patent offices appears to have decreased to about 5 to 23 months, as against the earlier duration of about 72 months. India's ranking in the Global Innovation Index has ascended from 81 in 2015 to 2016 to 46 in 2021. So all of these positive indications in the Indian IP regime have been mostly attributed to a few key initiatives taken by the government, including the reduction of about 80% in the patent filing fees for educational institutions and a reduction of about 10% in the trademark filings fees for online filing as against physical filing. In addition, the strong and concerted IP awareness programs launched by the government for students in schools, colleges, and universities across India, as well as for MSMEs, small businessmen, traditional artisans, and craftsmen through various channels, including the Atal Tinkering Labs, has imparted more awareness and insights to these sections of the population on IP creation, ownership, and protection, as well as the potential value proposition of IP to generate revenue through diverse streams of monetization. That said, it should also be remembered in this context that mere filing numbers alone do not reflect the quality of patent filings. What is required is a considered initiative to improve the quality of patents, which in turn stem from the quality and seminality of the inventions in the patent, and the quality of the drafting of the claims and the supporting specification for the exacting levels of protection and enforceability to the invention and the attendant techno-economic value. I am sure that most of you, faculty and students, are aware about what is IP and what are the various types of IP protection. Briefly, IP is a negative, exclusive, and exclusionary statutory right on any invention granted to an inventor or an applicant by the state or the government in return for disclosure of the invention. IP exists in almost everything that you do every day, the notes that you prepare, the drawings that you make, the experimental arrangements and designs that you make, the computer programs, software, and the codes that you create, the manuals that you prepare, the music that you hear, the mobile phones and caller tunes that you use, and the inventions that arise from your activities in your laboratories and classrooms. More than all of these, in the present times, IP should be more realized as a techno-legal instrument, a discipline or a thought process in itself to enable us to understand technology and its progression or evolution with time through inventions and innovations as distinct from a mere bunch of rules or laws. This tells you how and why IP is different from technical or research publications. IP is a global capital contributor to the tune of about $5 trillion as per 2015 reports. Intangible assets amount to approximately 87 to 90% of overall company value and about 50 to 55% of enterprise value. IP is a great source of revenue, offering protection to inventions and technologies, forming a deterrent to competitors, a market or business driver, and a growth index of companies and organizations, offering prime mover advantage. IP builds brands and reputation for companies and organizations, brings in benchmarks for comparing and contrasting entities, and confers global thought leadership. Further, IP also attracts investments and monetization opportunities. The value of IP, as already mentioned earlier, lies in its techno-legal enforceability. So IP is expensive to create and maintain, while it is even more expensive to buy, violate, or infringe another's IP. This slide sort of explains, or rather tells you what I just managed to tell you finally in my last slide. On this note, let us also look at another dimension of IP value, which is the fact that IP has the power to make and break companies. Why do we say this? For the past several years, IP has often been associated with high-profile patent wars and litigations that ran the mills for years, hogging the limelight globally on account of purported infringements or violations of the IP of one company by another, entailing huge amounts of penalties, damages, and so on and so forth to companies and corporates by and large. In addition, we also have various scenarios of patent and IP sales and acquisitions between companies involving huge amounts paid and received by them. In this slide, I'll just sort of give you a few snapshots of some leading companies which were either involved in protracted legal battles and litigation proceedings in courtrooms over IP infringements, or were involved in hefty financial transactions or payouts in lieu of their IP assets, hitting media headlines all over the world. One of the very high-profile epic patent wars that rocked the IP firmament was a long-running 14.5-year battle between Eastman, Kodak, and Polaroid that started off in 1976 and was settled only in 1991, with Kodak eventually paying up $925 million as damages to Polaroid, inclusive of interest, the largest damages settlement ever paid out till date. I'm sure most of you would have heard the details and specifics of this case. You would also probably be aware that Kodak recalled the entire generation of instant photographic cameras sold to customers between 1976 and 1986, handing out appropriate compensation packages to all impacted customers. In 2013, Kodak sold off almost 1,100 of its digital photography patents to many of its licensees, such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, etc., for almost $525 million US. Another reason blockbuster patent litigation that rocked the IP world was the Apple-Samsung litigation, which most of you would again be aware, that started off in 2011 to last for about 7 years with winding allegations and counter-allegations between the companies. Eventually, the dispute got settled out for damages to the tune of $539 million US dollars. Sorry about that. Awarded to Apple over its allegation of patent infringement against Samsung. In India, one of the major patent litigations that hit the headlines was the Bajaj TVS patent battle that started off in 2007 and ran till 2019. In September 2007, Bajaj Auto accused TVS Motors of infringing its patent on the digital twin spark plug ignition technology when TVS Motors launched its 125cc motorcycle model, Flame 125, that incorporated the controlled combustion variable timing intelligent technology, also referred to as the CCVTI technology. Bajaj Auto claimed that TVS CCVTI technology was a copy of its own DTSI technology, which it uses in various products, including the Pulsar series of bikes. TVS, however, denied Bajaj Auto's allegations and slapped a 250 crore rupee defamation suit against Bajaj Auto. The case finally landed at the Supreme Court, as most of you might be aware. In effect, this entailed Bajaj delaying the launch of the TVS Flame 125cc bikes, claiming patent infringement. All this is overused by TVS of digital twin spark ignition for enhanced fuel efficiency, which is one of the classic cases in history of using IP for delaying its company's competitors. However, on 31st October 2019, both TVS Motor and Bajaj Auto impromptu arrived at a mutual settlement of their decade-long dispute, agreeing to withdraw all pending proceedings and absolve each other from all outstanding liabilities, claims, demands, and actions in respect of the pending court proceedings. And when talks of IP sales or acquisitions, as the slide shows, here are a few examples just for your information. Google purchased the Motorola patent portfolio of more than 17,000 patents in 2011 for almost $3.5 billion US dollars, with the objective of protecting its Android operating system from its competitors in the mobile application space. Yet another significant patent sales activity was the 2012 acquisition of 800 patents of AOL by Microsoft for US dollars 1.056 billion, turning them around to Facebook for almost $550 million US dollars in cash. So what do all of these figures and numbers tell you? All of these instances again show that IP is costly to create as well as infringe. Furthermore, there are price tags attached to IP, which only indicate its value. However, we should also realize quickly that the value proposition of IP is larger than the price tag per se. Over the next couple of slides, I have sought to digress a bit to let you know yet another important yet common basis of IP value. Very often we see that any product or device has multiple streams or layers of IP protection for the various components of the product or the device. For instance, let's look at a couple of examples. One of our ultra-modern devices, one of the latest models of the smartphone, has thousands of patents and other types of IP protecting the various aspects of its design, brand name, and functionality. As we would see shortly, all of these types of IP protection would either be enforceable within the same duration of time or would be phased out or staggered, depending on the various improvements made to the various features of the product of the device, as in the case of patent families linked by priority claims. Similarly, the next slide takes an older product, the Tata Nano car, which we all know was protected by more than 37 patents and more than 31 designs. Thus, any finished product is protected by multitudes of IP instruments, which would be packaged into what we call as IP or patent portfolios. Having portfolios is one of the key approaches to enhance IP value. On this note, let us see how we can understand an IP portfolio. Simply put, a portfolio could be understood as a collection of related or unrelated IP instruments or types. They could either be granted patents, they could be trademarks, they could be designs, copyrights, etc., or even pending applications that are owned by an entity or an organization. Among the various possibilities here, one of the simplest yet rare scenarios would be the case of a company that has a singular novel and inventive product whose components are already in the public domain or are patent protected. In this case, we could have an IP portfolio that packages various IP types protecting distinct features of the brand, the design, and or the function or the utility of the product. Another more common case would be that of a company that is set to market a multi-component product, wherein the novelty, inventiveness, and differentiators of the product rest on the novelty and the inventiveness of the various contributing components. In such a case, it's possible to have multiple patent portfolios around each component as well. The essential and important feature of an IP or a portfolio is that the patents or the IP types therein should address or protect similar or related technical or industry problems with linked and targeted solutions that could be offered by one or more industries working on similar or related problems. In addition, it is equally important that the addressed problems and solutions have current and future market value and envisage novel, inventive, and differentiated feature improvements, additions, or adaptations to the solutions to the referenced problems already offered by existing portfolios. It is this directionality that makes a patent portfolio a value multiplier. In this slide, let's take a simple pictorial representation that would tell us all what an IP portfolio is, how we could understand an IP portfolio in simple terms, and how and why an IP portfolio becomes an IP value multiplier. If you see this left column, it shows a few bricks that have been strewn around in a haphazard manner. If you look at the right side, the right column that shows random arrangements of these bricks. Thinking a little bit, we quickly realize that bricks go to form buildings. They form an essential ingredient that are used to construct buildings. Using this analogy, you can quickly come to the realization that individual patents are indeed like bricks, and a portfolio is like a collection of bricks. The question is, what kind of a collection do you want that to be? Are the bricks heaped in a pile, as we see on the right column on the ground, or have they been assembled into a strong and attractive building, as we see in the central column? The intangible value proposition of a strong and attractive building made of these bricks is what we realize through a strong, well-organized, and well-strategized IP portfolio. Now let's get down to the next, or rather the key young challenge question for this year as set by the WIPO, which is actually a spin-off from the theme set by WIPO for this year. How do we create valuable, value-returning IP assets for self-reliant and self-sufficient India? Atmanirbhar Bharat. We should all realize that valuable IP stems from both big science and game-changing technologies that offer targeted and well-benchmarked, novel, inventive, useful, tangible, and concrete solutions to real-time industry and societal problems, never offered by others so far. First, Let's develop holistic, progressive, interdisciplinary, or rather cross-disciplinary and linked solutions that would be valuable to industry in solving multiple connected problems, yielding rich diversity in applications that would be valuable to industry across segments. These solutions, whether they are products or they are processes, should essentially be benchmarked against the state of the art for the technology and market differentiators, or their so-called techno-commercial potential that would form the basis of IP value. Further, we must ensure that these solutions are effectively protected through competent and well-reinforced streams of IP protection, well in time to ensure a sustained IP value runway for our solutions. Towards this end, a well-calculated IP strategy needs to be devised for layered or tierized protection of patents, of core inventions. I would say tierized patent filings, protection on core inventions, followed by secondary ring-fenced filings to protect incremental improvements, adaptations, and market-oriented additions or applications. This is what I would call a coherent and cohesive problem solution ecosystem, which is critical to fostering creation and utilization of valuable IP. Over and above all of these, it is also important that the potential of artificial intelligence and machine learning be leveraged as tools to generate and facet novel and game-changing solutions. In this slide, let us see the host of factors and ready reckoners that have a very important or central bearing on the generation of valuable IP. The important ones have been presented on this slide. At the outset, it is important to have an objective self-appraisal of the initial competitive advantage that any entity or organization commands in respect of initiating R&D activities in any technology or industry practice area, creation and protection of new IP, reinforcement of existing IP, and monetization of IP. This competitive advantage would either be the background IP or the granted patents of the organization, or the know-how available with the organization in specific technology or industry practice areas, the resources available, their core competence, the stakeholders, and so on and so forth. This essentially involves taking an inventory of the background patents and IP of any organization with a view to understanding the strengths, the shortfalls, and encumbrances of one's own IP from quality, scope, and utility standpoints. The next important factor that we see on the slide is the competitive environment of the organization in the relevant technology or the industry practice areas. Here we strive to understand who are the entities or the companies or the organizations active in similar or related technology areas overlapping with our activities. This essentially involves recognition of third-party or competitor IP ownership rights, evaluation of third-party or competitor IP from strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat perspectives, the key competing technologies, the geographical distribution of competitor activity, and the target markets. These activities constitute what we call as competitive intelligence, generating state-of-the-art patent landscapes and several reports or assessments on patentability of inventions and clearance or freedom to operate in respect of potential products or technologies that any organization seeks to market. Both of the above mentioned two activities, whether they be self-appraisal or whether they be competitive intelligence, they require Patinformatics tools, which involve searches for competitor patents, data and text mining, and analysis. These activities in turn also give insights on how to use third-party IP for own R&D, such as through IP acquisition or for IP licensing, etc. It also gives insights on how to track competitive roadmaps with predictive analytics, consolidate and strategize an organization's IP position, and maximize competitive advantage of the organization while minimizing potential IP risks. In addition, it is also important to know the key emerging application segments, the industry trends, the precedents, and best practices in the relevant technology or industry practice areas, which enable due diligence to identify directions for industry stakeholdership and partnership in the technology development process, thereby facilitating creation of appropriately oriented valuable IP. These would help us identify the core inventions for primary filings and reinforce these core filings with subsequent secondary filings, protecting additions, improvements, and market-oriented applications. Further to these, it is also essential to know the consumers or customers, the target market segments, and the actual real-time market demand for the relevant products or technologies. These, in turn, would give insights on the low-risk USPs for proposed products, the countries with market opportunities, and the appropriate market entry, positioning, and exit strategies. Last but never the least, it is also imperative to fix the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning-based approaches as effective tools to aid technology and product development. On the transactional side, the IP filing costs and the fees would also be factors that would guide decisions on cost-effective filing of valuable and value-returning IP for the organization. In this slide, we sort of try to outline very briefly the various considerations involved in defining the initial competitive advantage model, which primarily involves background IP appraisal, strategic positioning of our background IP for any proposed stream of R&D or technology development activity, and evaluation of the strengths, weaknesses, and encumbrances of our background patents through Patinformatics approaches. Patent quality has been a subjective concept that has been debated widely in academia, industry, and corporate circles for the past several years. Being abstract features or concepts based on the characteristics or attributes of a patent, patent quality and utility could be qualitatively evaluated using various metrics or indicators employing Patinformatics tools. However, it is important that these metrics be carefully selected to ensure that these function as the best possible proxies or measures of patent quality. These include patent-centric or intrinsic, as well as invention-centric or extrinsic indicators, as we would see through the remainder of this slide. Intrinsic indicators, what are they? They are mostly patent-specific and qualitative metrics, which would identify the value of selected patents on their face, pending further examination of the claims, enablement, and their scope, indicating whether the shortlisted patents have value in the first place before proceeding to further assessments on their value and techno-commercial potential. These include, but are not limited to what we have sought to outline in this slide, and more that I shall seek to tell you as I go along with this slide. At the very outset, we have the priority date. Then we have the legal status of the patent. Is a patent alive or expired? The validity and enforceability of the patent. The remaining active life left for the patent. The geographical coverage or distribution of patenting activity. The number of family members with maybe their patents or applications. Number of forward and backward citations. The number and breadth of the independent claims. The subject matter of the independent claims, which precisely looks at whether these claims are oriented towards tangible, concrete, and useful products and devices, or are they oriented towards intangible stuff, business methods, or say software, or algorithms, or laws of nature, etc., which we all know are clearly non-patent eligible entities. Further, it is also important that we look at the clarity of the claims and the supporting specification, the scope of the claims and the coverage of the claims, the enablement strength offered to the claims by the supporting specification, the faithfulness of the patent claims to the scope of the underlying invention, and the strength and resistance of the patents, which would obviously be exemplified by the strength of the enabling specification as well as the strength of the claims against circumvention, infringement, or third-party enforcement, as evidenced by the breadth, the strength, the morphology, and the composition of the claims, and the due enabling support extended to the claims by the specification. In addition to these factors, it is also important to look at prior licensing deals that have happened for the patent, sale of the patent, monetization deals as evidenced by security interests from banks or money lending organizations, pointing to the monetization potential of the patents and their interest in acquisition and monetization of the patents, sale agreements, etc., so on and so forth. The extrinsic variables primarily relate to the merits and differentiators of the inventions addressed by the patents. These again include the following without limitation: the utility or the usefulness of the underlying inventions in the patent, as evidenced by the present and anticipated applications or field of use and new product lineups in native and other countries, territories, etc. Then we also look at technology adoption timelines in respect of the inventions, products, or services protected or covered by the patents. Then we have the most important factor, the commercial or the market value proposition of the inventions in the patent, as evidenced by the competitive advantage provided by the patents in the markets, present and emerging markets for the above, and the projections of revenue and profit margins returned by the patents, and the anticipated revenue that is returned from the envisioned and emerging applications or field of use through licensing fees, royalties, or sales of these patents. Further, an important point that should never be overlooked is the importance of the patents to the core technology and the business footprints of any company, as evidenced by the relevance and centrality of the claimed subject matter to the target markets and the current market products, the overall indispensability of the patents to the technology, the markets, and the business. In other words, the straight question that we are asking is, are the patents replaceable with other more cost-effective alternatives, entailing higher revenues and profit margins? Then we also look at the technology readiness levels of the inventions, products or services protected or covered by the patents. The next slide examines, or rather, in this connection, we also look at, there are various other factors that need to be looked at positioning our background patents for what we propose to work on. This would also involve considerations of a third-party IP that needs to be acquired to facilitate our proposed research, guidelines for IP management, details of agreements and policy documents that articulate guidelines, procedures for IP ownership, etc. This is more applicable in an R&D environment involving students, researchers, or faculty who primarily need to be aware about the use of IP rights, IP sharing in collaborative researchers, as well as profit sharing on successful commercial exploitation of jointly owned IP. This slide actually highlights yet another important dimension of competitive advantage, and that is competitive intelligence. As much as you know yourselves, it is equally important to know your competitors as well. The key issues here are the recognition of third-party or competitor IP ownership, IP rights, evaluation of third-party or competitor IP, etc. So what are the key questions to be asked here? What are the key competing technologies? What are the countries wherein these technologies are patent protected? Where are the target markets? All of these could be answered through Patinformatics tools and approaches involving patent searches, mining of patent data and text, and subsequent in-depth analysis that yield state-of-the-art patent landscapes of patenting activity of the key competitors. This competitive intelligence homework, in turn, helps us understand how to use third-party IP for our own R&D. Do we have to acquire third-party IP, or is it worthwhile to license somebody else's IP to get our foreground R&D on track? In addition, this also helps us track competitor roadmaps, employing predictive analytics, as we mentioned earlier, and thereby consolidate and strategize our IP position, maximizing our IP competitive advantage and minimizing IP risks. This slide sort of gives you a broad overview of the overall process flow and approaches employed in Patinformatics activities, which primarily involve 4 stages, namely patented prior art searches, screening of captured patents and prior art for relevancy, analysis of the screened patents, and prior art depending on the objective of the study, namely whether it is understanding the state of the art or filing of a patent application or the market launch of a product. The canvas of entities, activities, data, and information covered under each stage is shown on the slide. The last block or the last stage of the process flow involves outputs or the work products of analysis that feature subtle snapshots of projections of third-party or competitor activity, which have to be presented to the clients or the target beneficiaries as reports, presentations, or patent maps. These would essentially feature the recommendations on the state of the art, whether the invention is patentable, or whether the developed product is marketable in a specific country or jurisdiction. Accordingly, these are called state-of-the-art assessments, patentability assessments, or freedom to operate or clearance assessments. This slide shows you the outcomes of the Patinformatics activities that we discussed earlier. For those of you who are not aware of these terminologies, as I'm trying to explain them again in case you're not aware of what we discussed on the previous slide. State-of-the-art patent landscapes provide information on blocked versus available areas for new R&D activities, while patentability assessment reports provide information on the available patent filing opportunities for novel, inventive, product-oriented, or market-oriented inventions. Freedom to operate assessment reports provide evaluation, benchmarking of different differentiator features and specifications of products, solutions, or technologies versus enforceable relevant patents and state-of-the-art products. It gives you IP due diligence for risk assessment on competing patents and design around or circumvention recommendations for low-risk market positioning of products, solutions, and technologies. Further, it should also be noted that patentability assessments are only a necessary prerequisite to a patent filing, not a sufficient condition. In the present times, with too many filings cohabiting the landscape, it is imperative that the techno-commercial potential of inventions be evaluated prior to patent filing to ascertain that a patent protecting a piece of invention would be valuable tomorrow over the years to come. Now let's go to the next slide. Here we talk about what are the key takeaways from Patinformatics. What are the insights that any Patinformatics activity that we discussed over the last couple of slides gives us? Put briefly, Patinformatic insights are primarily on IP value drivers. They tell you how to position your inventions for strong, broad patent filings, or how to position your proposed products for low-risk market launches through projections of the market differentiators and appropriate design around strategies to reduce risks. The insights from Patinformatics enable us benchmark our inventions, our products, our solutions, and technologies against third-party activities, and thereby enable us identify opportunities of white spaces for technology development and IP creation, showing us directions of R&D and technology development and IP protection to be pursued that are near certain to return value to the organization. Through this exercise, we gather insights into what could be valuable IP for us and how do we create such valuable IP. On the next couple of slides, I have just sought to articulate a few open points that we need to ponder over and think very deeply in respect of any organization that is to add in the context of evaluating its background IP and its readiness to take on any challenging line of R&D activity for new and valuable IP creation. First and foremost, how evolved is our core background technology and our core background IP? How many patents do we have in our portfolio that are potentially enforceable in India or the respective countries where they are granted? How many of them have claims protecting industrially marketable products and are enforceable in their respective territories? How strong, how broad, and how narrow are the claims in these patents? Is our background IP evolved, reinforced, and enabled enough to facilitate or support or protect diverse, new, emerging application segments in different domains to cater to unmet customer requirements or expectations? What are the gaps or shortfalls that we have? How far have cross-disciplinary ideas been invoked in our background IP in the context of solving existing problems and supporting granted claims? How far do we do know-how and trade secrets complement or supplement our background IP in the context of solving existing problems, supporting the granted claims in these patents? To what extent is in licensing of background IP required for new foreground IP? Do our background patents protect products, processes that are easy to copy or reverse engineer? In other words, the question that we are asking is, do our processes, which are patent protected, leave signatures on the products that come out of them? How many of our patents are purely process patents? Processes, as we all know, are operated within the battery limits of the manufacturing facilities. It is very difficult to enforce process patents. The products which come out do not infringe our process patents because of the plain reason that they do not read on the claims. How many of the inventions protected by our patents are techno-commercially viable or feasible? What is patentable need not be necessarily profitable. So I've just sought to articulate very loud with you, what are the important guiding thought questions that need to be addressed if we need to realize IP value through our technology development activities or through our R&D activities, so that the filings that we generate and the patents that get granted, assigned to us, end of the day, hold out value in the markets for tomorrow. The next slide, I have sought to address the market potential of IP. As we all know, the IP market space interface is one of the most critical drivers of IP value, or factors that need to be reckoned in the context of when we try to craft our inventions and protect them by scoping our claims. What are the markets? The plain questions that I'm asking here are, what are the markets that our technologies would cater to or facilitate? What is the real-time market demand for the products stemming from our technologies? Does our IP facilitate or cater to or support first entry into a hitherto unexplored market space, or are we new entrants into a crowded market space? A very important question. Accordingly, what would be our market entry, market positioning, and market exit strategies? To what extent is it capital intensive to market products or devices stemming from our technologies? To what extent would a patent, which is strong or broad, drive market power for us down the road? This defines the case of what we call as market-oriented IP, which is one of the most critical dimensions or factors that needs to be incorporated into the overall value chain if we need to derive value out of our IP instruments. Based on all of the foregoing discussions, one thing becomes very clear to us. It's well evident that creation and maintenance of valuable IP requires a well thought out strategic approach. In this slide, I have sought to give you a very broad overview, or I would say a broad blueprint of an active strategy and process flow for IP creation, protection, management, and monetization at various stages of technology or product development. At the outset, there should be efforts to define, refine, and position your invention precisely, completely, with emphasis on the problems addressed and the differentiated solutions offered. Towards this end, the core inventions need to be scoped very effectively, focusing on the products, the processes, the devices, the systems, or the compositions, the core entities that would go to form the protected elements of the claims in our patent or in our application. Further, the supporting specification expounding the utility or the figures of merit through the embodiments and the working examples covering all the features of the invention provide the canvas for future filings or application claims. Thus, we see what are called primary filings in our case. Further, inventive foreground improvements or enhancements or adaptations that are oriented towards new emerging application segments and industry requirements could be protected through timely, subsequent, priority-linked filings, which could be called either co-pending applications or patents of addition or new filings for new subject matter. These form a pipeline of future filings, which are placed as cells or fences around core inventions, forming what we call secondary filings. Such filings meeting customer requirements and markets needs or market requirements, they hold out potential IP value. In addition to these organic or active approaches, it would also be appropriate to view inorganic or passive approaches, such as acquiring IP or in licensing third-party IP to meet at least part of our core foreground or incremental foreground R&D or technology development requirements. So these, I would call them as inorganic or passive strategies, depending on the core competence and the resources available within the organization. This slide, shows you a broad generic process flow for IP capture, creation, protection, and enforcement. While IP functions as an R&D enabler, seeking to position and benchmark our background IP or patents versus third-party or competitor IP or patents from a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat perspective, Patinformatic approaches furnish the available feasible opportunities for R&D, patent filings, and market positioning of our foreground products stemming from our research activities or projects. Thus, this process flow that we have showed that we are looking at on this slide enables a structured and prioritized creation and protection of core, product-oriented, application-oriented, and market-oriented IP filings, which hold out the requisite IP value proposition. In addition to all of these thought processes, we should also realize that proactive IP risk assessment and mitigation are equally important when it comes to realizing IP value. These include prevention of infringements of competitor IP by us in the first place, and infringement of our background IP and foreground IP or patents by our competitors. These are very important for us to prevent business revenue losses. In addition, it is very important that we look at strategic IP risk management. Strategic IP risk management involves way more steps than mere Patinformatics approaches that we discussed over the last several slides. We also need to look at blending or combining avoid, protect, and defend approaches in the context of preserving the value of our patents or any other types of IP that form parts of our portfolios. Looking at the first approach, these are all defensive approaches, as I already told you. And looking at the avoidance approach, primarily, first and foremost, let us not have any disputes. It is very important to have in-house IP mentoring and monitoring of all employees. We need to enlist rigorous in-house clearance or freedom to operate searches, due diligence, and formally and legally binding opinions in the context of product launches that are proposed by us or by our partnering industries. in licensing options from third party, if feasible and viable, should be explored. From the protection standpoint, we must have non-disclosure agreements, even with employees. We should have IP agreements, IP policy documents for collaborative partnerships, for joint inventorship, and even for IP sharing modalities. This becomes very important in an academic setting like MIT ADT, where we have a strong IP policy in place and we clearly articulate what are the various dimensions of an IP policy and what are the various aspects which an IP policy sheds light on in the context of inculcating awareness about these aspects among our students and the faculty. In addition, it is also important to have confidentiality notices, privacy policy terms and conditions. We also need to have formal and legally binding patentability opinions. In addition to all of these, we should also explore cost-effective provisional and PCT filing options before we ever think of publishing our work. It is very critical, as several speakers would again point out in subsequent deliberations here. Publication and patenting are two distinct streams that never need to interfere with each other. Before you ever think of publishing something, please do not forget to patent your inventions. Do not allow your prior publications to become prior art against your own inventions that would very badly jeopardize your opportunities for potential IP filings. This is one of the reasons why we often advise provisional patent filings on the core, protecting the different aspects or facets of your invention before we decide to publish any overlapping results which have got conclusions that might be important from an academic standpoint or perspective. Last but not the least, it is also important to defend yourself. You need to understand the importance of defensive publications. The secrecy of inventive foreground ideas till filing is very important. Careful and timely pre-filing disclosures, timely assignment of granted patents, timely valuation of patent portfolios, and proactive IP management are all very important aspects towards factors that need to be reckoned towards realizing IP value. Finally, let's understand that IP is not confined to any particular stage. This slide gives you what I would call an IP value life cycle, where in every stage has a set of activities aimed at enhancing IP value. When one talks of IP value, we should remember that this does not lie in either in IP capture or in IP filing or in portfolio management, singularly or in isolation alone. No, it is a cumulative value that gets accumulated through a dichotomy of activities that we plan to pursue in every single stage that I have sought to outline here, which constitutes what we call our IP value life cycle. While it is very rare to have an IP business model at the very start of any activity, a few passes through the life cycle enables a feedback mechanism that helps companies or organizations plan the IP business model and have a formative vision of revenue generation model and returns at the end of the IP value life cycle. In simple terms, when we start off with a value life cycle, we would never know the IP business model. Let's go ahead, start off with the background IP, the inventory, have the invention disclosures, have the benchmarkings done, have the evaluation of the patentable entities, then as a result of which we proceed, or on the basis of which we proceed to strategic filings, reinforcements or ring-fencing in IP portfolio management, going all the way to IP enforcement and culminating in IP monetization or valorization. When we start thinking about how you would want IP to pay for your businesses, or what are the modalities that are open to you in making IP generate wealth for the organization, then we understand what would be the most favorable or viable IP model for us as an organization. So as I told you earlier, a multiple, at least a few passes through the entire value life cycle should get us the feedback, enriched vision on how we should plan the building of IP portfolios going forward, realizing the IP, the technology, and the business footprints of our company or organization. Now, summing up in summary, all that we have tried to discuss here is that throughout the development value chain, or throughout the R&D value chain, whether we are in the ideation stage, whether we are in design, whether we are in the development phase or the deployment phase, it is very important to build industry stakeholdership in projects. Why? Because industry stakeholdership gives any academic or any R&D environment a vision on what are the problems to focus on. What are the critical, important problems that seek solutions, real-time, real-world solutions. This is a vision, this is I would say, a very important point that needs to be borne in mind before we embark on any R&D activity or technology development activity, before we invest money, resources, or manpower. We need to evolve diverse case-specific engagement models with industry. There is no universal model or one-size-fits-all model. We should look for cross-disciplinary and collaborative approaches, okay, when it comes to solving real-time, linked, or I would say correlated, or I would say connected problems. When we solve problems, there should be complementarity in the problem solved, and there should be connections or link-ups in the solution that we offer. Cross-disciplinarity in solutions is equally important. Based on these, we move to the next important point, or the key question. How do we build and file valuable and value-returning IP? Here is where Patinformatics becomes the first player. Look for novel, inventive, innovative, industry-ready solutions. Use Patinformatics tools to benchmark your solutions against the state of the art. Use the tools of freedom to operate to understand how your solutions can be risk-free or low-risk, involving or invoking appropriate design around models so that the solutions still remain attractive and competitive in the market by solving connected or related problems. Next is competitive intelligence or benchmarking. Design. This again clearly a Patinformatics playbook here, where we understand how we maximize the value while minimizing IP risks in the market. Develop solutions which are cross-disciplinary, which are holistic and progressive in function and attribute. When we develop a solution, let that open up more solutions, not opening up more problems or opening up more downsides in implementation of the solutions. Focus on core inventions, products or devices, which hold out differentiators by virtue of their transformative features. Focus on new, emerging, cross-disciplinary applications which have market potential and hold out an IP value runway. As we already emphasized in one of our earlier slides, this is the importance of having core filings which are suitably reinforced or supplemented by secondary filings down the road, either as priority linked filings or patterns of addition or subsequent filings on new subject matter, all of which would open up an IP value runway for extended IP protection and monetary value for the inventions down the road. Then last but not the least, it's very important to evaluate the value chain. Where are our target markets? Who are our customers? Patents are not instruments that stand in isolation. They have market potential. If a patent needs to be valuable, or if any patent portfolio or an IP portfolio for us needs to return value to us, we need to understand what are those marketable products which are going to hit the market tomorrow that our patents are going to protect down the road. What is the overall technology and IP value proposition? Where are the licensing opportunities? Do we need to in-license IP to do our R&D? We should, asking a similar question, we should also be equally open to the proposition. Are there external parties who would be willing to license our IP? What are the possibilities where we can earn revenue to other by out-licensing our IP to other industry partners who will find value through our IP, regardless of whether these are our core forte or otherwise. Those industries may have a different line of R&D activity, which may be distinct or different from the technology or business footprints that we have. In addition, last but not the least, it's important to evaluate the IP from cost, market, and income approaches to have a realistic appraisal on what is the revenue that is returned from our intellectual property or from our IP portfolios. As scientists and engineers, starting off from laboratories, looking at scientific and technical data, a sound awareness of IP from both substantive and procedural fronts helps us train ourselves to be objective, empirical, and analytical in our collective efforts in the developments of products, devices, and technologies that solve the problems for tomorrow. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for such an insights on IP value. Now, considering the same context, I would like to ask you a question from the participants.
Sure.
Sir, what are the key factors influencing the value of IP asset, as you rightly mentioned? What are various factors?
Okay, that is what my presentation summarizes. I mean, it is, as I showed you on slide number 13, there are multiple factors. Okay, first and foremost, if you want to start talking about IP value, it's about what you already have. Okay, if you want to start any line of R&D activity, you have got to involve in new activities or which active industry, we have to look out for industry problems, which address, which are the problems the burning problems that industry seeks to solve. What are those problems which actually require solutions? May not be in the immediate present, but for tomorrow as well. Then we have to start evaluating what is it that we already have? Do we have the core competence? Do we have any background patterns or IP that solves those problems? If not, do we at least have a baseline or a threshold where we can have a few patterns that really point us to potential solutions which we can evolve in the context of solving these problems? Okay, that is one of the most important aspects. The second is, when you evolve a solution, you should also understand who are our competitors. Okay, I mean, it is you are not the only guy, or you're not the only person or organization, okay, working on things or working on solutions to problems. There may be multiple industries, there are multiple entities all over the world. And you should remember that prior art is universal in impact. So we need to know who are our competitors who have developed similar or even related solutions. And then we should understand what are the opportunities that we have to develop new things. So primarily focus on solutions that would be very important for industry for tomorrow. That's the first and foremost thing. Because unless your solutions are new, your solutions are novel, inventive, progressive, and connected, you cannot expect to derive value out of whatever patents that of course protect them. Then we have got a multitude of other factors. One is what are the industry practice areas. Then we also have what are the market realities. Then we have what are the various trends which are being currently practiced by industry. What are the as I already showed you on slide number 13. Okay, let me take you back to slide number 13 for a better clarity on what I was discussing earlier. If you look at these slides, okay, this particular thing also clearly explains what was already recognized there. Then, what are the USPs of the products going to be? Where are the countries where your markets are? So, starting off from IP competitive advantage, there are a host of factors which are going to be important when it comes to generating IP value. And last but not the least, it is also important on how you plan to protect your IP from adversaries. You have to steer clear of any kinds of infringement litigations. You don't want any encumbrances for your IP portfolio. You need to take all the proactive steps that are required to ensure that we do not infringe on somebody else's IP, nor does any third party infringe into our IP portfolio. So that we are, I agree that it is an ideal situation. In the real world, we do have situations where people come into opposition, there are litigations, but everywhere, if you do the pre-filing homework properly, I would say the Patinformatics homework to understand what is it that we have and what is it that we are going to invent or going to protect, which is going to be well benchmarked against the rest of the world, then the IP, that is the starting point to build IP value proposition.
Thank you, sir.
I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. On the same line, because today we are in the era of number game, right? Recently, you know that Elon Musk taken over the Twitter as well. So in terms of IP, because most of the IP owners, or even before filing the IP, they are very much interested to know the valuation of their IP, what and how, because when they proceed for some commercialization or licensing, definitely they find it difficult that what shall be the valuation of our IP. So, sir, the question is how to do valuation of IP. Is there any systematic approach, or what are the various factors we shall consider?
Well, IP valuation is a very very large and a very comprehensive and a very massive process. Okay, so what I have sought to give you here, they are just qualitative indicators of IP value. But IP valuation is something which involves a lot of specialized and highly specialized professionals. It involves attorneys, it involves chartered accountants with finance background, it involves technologists, it involves patent analysts, patent agents. It's a hugely multidisciplinary activity. Okay, that is something I should tell you upfront. Okay, what my presentation has sought to give is, before we do the formal IP evaluation, how do we identify what are the patents that are going to be of prima facie value? Okay, before we go into the evaluation stage, it is important for us to weed out patents that, on the face of it, we know are not going to be valuable. So that is an in-house process, which is by and large qualitative in nature. But to answer your question, IP evaluation follows three primary routes or processes or approaches. One is a cost-based approach. Next is the market-based approach. And the third is the income-based approach. For technology organizations, especially like, or even for R&D or academic institutions, majority of our IP is going to be futuristic. We are going to address future problems, or problems for tomorrow. It's going to be even more important for us to look at income-based approaches, where we evaluate the net present value of the inventions tomorrow. Understanding that there are specific solutions that are going to hit the road tomorrow. Using our IP, we rather extrapolate and understand what are the real time, what is the net present value of those inventions. So we could at least get into an extrapolative evaluation of what is the value that these patents or a family of patents or a portfolio of patents are going to hold out tomorrow at the time of reckoning. I hope that's the best answer I can give.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. During your presentation, you deliberately mentioned about the India's, how we have jumped from 62nd rank to 46th rank in Global Innovation Index. So even when we talk about Indian regime, I was also going through the reports published by WIPO. And in 2018, India was leading in terms of abundant patents, right? So the question I would like to ask you, because even in academia, what we have observed, most of the faculty members, they do file patents. Most of the research scholars, they do file patents, but later on, they don't go for renewal and the patent is being abandoned. They don't respond to the queries raised by the controller office. So what shall IP owners do to retain their intellectual property rights, and how they shall try to identify potential industries for their IP commercialization so that they could retain their IP? What shall be their approach?
First and foremost, it's important to understand that IP is important not to build your resumes or to build your CV or even to garner promotions in any academic environment. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it is one of the objectives. There's no issue on that count. We are fine with that. But this is not the be-all and end-all of any IP creation process. The ultimate objective of any IP creation process is to build value, intangible value to the organization. When you talk about intangible value, the value comes from the value of the inventions underlying in the patent, the value of the differentiated solutions that are being offered by the inventions in the patent. And as a result of which, the patent, by virtue of it being a techno-legal instrumentality and a techno-economic feasibility and techno-enforceability, becomes valuable as an instrument that protects those solutions. So in the first place, when patents are being filed, there should be regular follow-up tracks with the patent office. Okay, that is what we call as prosecution. A patent prosecution is not a one spot or it's not a one-shot affair. There will be multiple back and forth correspondence between the patent office and the inventors and the inventors. Okay, whether they are the students or whether they are the faculty of the university, they should give very high importance to addressing the specific questions being raised by the patent examiners and answering them to the level best that they can in the light of their invention. Because it is important to know that as inventors or as faculty or students, they are any day better seized about the technical realities of their invention than the patent office or than even the lawyers or the attorneys are. So it's important to engage with the patent office, okay, in a very structured communication or a correspondence, trying to highlight what the patent value is. Okay, with this, so by actually responding to their queries in that way, we have to take the patent prosecution to its culmination and the patent gets granted. Once the patent gets granted, we have got the renewal exercises coming in. Patents need to be renewed. This is an exercise which the organization needs to take very seriously. Once a patent gets granted, it is an enforceable instrument. The important question to ask is, what is the working of these patents? In which way do we think that the inventions that have been protected by this patent are going to be utilized by our organization? Okay, whether it's MIT, ADT, or any university or any R&D laboratory, how are we going to utilize this invention going forward? Do we have any specific thought process? If there needs to be, when you start planning on an R&D activity, this is what I told you previously on the background IP. Once you have patents filed with you, that becomes your background. That sort of becomes your baseline. And then you understand how you need to build on your existing background IP if you need to facilitate your foreground R&D projects or your R&D activities or in a student thesis. If a student is working towards a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis where a very important industry problem is going to be addressed, then at the very outset, he or she needs to look at what is the background that we already have, or is it important that we in-license or acquire any IP so that going forward and taking this activity forward, we would not run into any litigations or extremely dangerous or very costly infringement suits with our competitors. That said, it is also important for us to realize that once an invention materializes from any R&D activity, we should first seek to protect them through a provisional filing, at least, before we take the jump towards a research publication. As I already pointed out during my lecture, a research publication may be good for us. Okay, it may look good, it may look pretty for us. Okay, from our resume standpoint, or from our I would say a promotion or whatever it is in the organization, or at least as a student, as an accomplishment from a student perspective. It is important to realize that this can function as a patent stopping prior art against you when you go to the patent office. So this realization is very important. If you think your work, your R&D work, okay, or your academic research is going to solve an important industry problem, whatever solutions get developed in the lab need to go in for proactive patent protection, at least through a provisional channel initially. And once a provisional filing is done, you all know it's valid only for a year. We need to pursue this further through non-provisional or regular filings, wherein we'll have to write up the full specification, okay, taking help from a patent agent or from a law firm or a law office, where we would have to work with them closely, understand the patent, okay, understand our invention, and scope the claims appropriately, so that whatever claims that will be protected tomorrow, once your application gets granted as a patent, does justice to whatever that we seek to protect through the invention, so that our patent becomes valuable. So these are all a few important points. As I told you earlier, there is no prescription or a recipe for IP value. Okay, we have to start the exercise. Once we start the exercise and take ourselves through the value chain, there are several small aspects, very minuscule aspects that become very important in the context of creating, perpetuating, fostering, and reinforcing our IP portfolio, which is going to impart value to us. Okay, students and faculty should all realize that one patent or maybe a few patents are not going to hold value for it. That is the guiding or the overbearing message from my talk, what I sought to give you today. Patent value or IP value doesn't come from just one instrument or a set of haphazard IP instruments. We need to look at it from a portfolio standpoint. Okay, that is a different level of practicing IP. Okay, that is a different level of the exercise of IP as a discipline, where we are really having our eyes on IP value. So, to put in brief words, the overbearing question is, what for do you need IP? Do you need IP only to perpetuate your resumes, to ensure your promotions? Okay, or is it that you want IP to generate value for the organization and for the country? That is the first call that we need to take. The first and foremost, I would say, ground zero question that we need to address on priority, okay, before we think about anything else.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Rightly said, sir. Thank you so much, sir. And we sincerely appreciate the time and efforts, because it was comprehensive deck which you have prepared, I must say. Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. Moving on to the next questions, I would like to ask, since you represent CSIR's Unit for Research and Development for Information Products, URDIP. So, and we have been joined by many students and research scholars across India for the National Intellectual Property Convention 2022. I would like to ask one question on behalf of them. Okay. Sir, how to build career in Patinformatics, and how do you guide them to take it as a career considering future endeavors?
Well, it's a very relevant question, very important question, especially in the backup. You rightly sounded off or echoed the theme of the World IP Day set by WIPO, IP in youth. Okay, it's a very, very important and very, very nice question. Well, at the outset, you should know that IP is not about Patinformatics alone. I showed you an IP value life cycle here. Okay, if you go to my previous slide, which I'm still doing a screen sharing, there are you can have an IP in career in any of these various stages, okay, which are of course linked by the arrows, okay, in the circular, okay, in the whole value life cycle that I've tried to show you here. You can have an IP, you can have an IP informatics, or I would say an IP analysis career. You can have a career in drafting, patent drafting, okay. You can have a career in IP prosecution, or say patent prosecution. Then you can have a career in patent portfolio management, monetization, enforcement. Okay, assertion of IP is a totally different, ball game, where it involves multiple entities, and this is something which several people, even in India, they do not even take to, and there are a lot of mental roadblocks, even among our youngsters or even our youth, when it comes to taking up IP enforcement careers. Then, last but not least, we have IP valorization career. So, at the outset, my advice would be, you would have to understand IP holistically. IP is not about just creation, or it's not about patent wars. It is not about filing. It's not about courtroom battles and so on. It's a discipline in itself. When you learn IP as freshers, as starters, learn IP holistically. IP has got an entire value chain or a value life cycle attached to it. I would ask you to spend 2 or 3 years learning different aspects of IP as a whole, so as to build at least a ground level, a firm grounding or a grooming or a preliminary level of awareness in all of these aspects of IP, and then decide what is it that you want to do going down the road. Where do you think your skills or your taste lie? Okay, what is that specific aspect of IP that interests you? Okay, that is the overbearing question that, I would ask all of you. Of course, especially students. When it comes to analysis, the background preparation that you need are different. You need to have I would say, a natural interest in reading patterns. You need to develop a natural flair for reading patterns. And reading patterns is not like reading a research article or reading a general book or any piece of general literature. Okay? Reading a patent is both art and science. You need to understand, you need to have a flair for the art of reading patterns. And you need to have the skill as such. You need to catch or spot specific things which are going to be important in a patent document, that are going to be very material to you when it comes to looking at the specific person, the applicant or the inventor who has submitted and to whom the patent has been granted. or the assignee to whom the patent has been granted. Next, you should have a flair for the technology. You should be able to invest ample time learning the technology, the background very thoroughly before we venture out to, towards understanding the invention threadbare. And by the way, whether you take a career in patent analytics or say Patinformatics or say patent drafting, it is important to remember that your techno-legal expertise is what's going to be important here. You need to be good in technology. You also need to be good in understanding and appreciating the very fine and I would say fundamental nuances of IP law, which have got subtle differences across different countries or across territories. Okay, so the basic thing to do here to answer your question, Suraj, the basic thing is develop a flair for IP. You need to participate in workshops. Okay, develop interest in what are the important nuances of IP from a precept standpoint, from a statutory standpoint, as well as from a practice standpoint. Okay, IP has got two dimensions to it. One is substantive patent law, as well as procedural patent law. Procedural patent law talks about rules, laws, and so on, how to enforce them, and so on and so forth. And that would again be a set of procedures. If that is what interests you, it is certainly a rewarding career. But Patinformatics is more of a techno-legal career, which really tests the fundamentals of the subject, or your awareness, your sound grooming in the technology in a very profound manner. So it all depends, So that's what I hope I can give as an answer to your question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your answer. And now I'll restrict to myself only last concluding question, and then sir, I can't resist to ask you this question because since I come from technology background and we have been doing a lot of endeavors in terms of emerging technology, we are living at the intersection of future of humanity and the world of technology, right? So what do you think of the role of intellectual property to build the synergy for better future, for better India, for better world?
Well, that's a very, very daunting and a very profound question, because primarily, you will have to look at the frameworks or the guiding or the foundational or the foundations. Okay, I would say the basic frameworks, based on which substantive and procedural IP law have been built in India or elsewhere in any part of the world. Okay, there are several guiding tenets to it, which may not be applicable in a different paradigm when you look at the future. A very important aspect, which of course I am being taken to the real point that your basic motivation for the question is about the excessive influx or the interference of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the patenting activity or even any technology activity or any R&D activities. Yes, it is very important to realize, as I pointed out in my presentation, it is very critical to realize how to fix or to understand how we need to fix the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you allow AI and machine learning tools, if you allow them to be tools, they could assist you in faceting your invention, giving directionality to your R&D activity and enabling you come up with cutting edge solutions, linked up solutions to the connected dating industry problems and help you build a coherent and cohesive IP portfolio that solves a multitude of connected problems. On the other hand, you should also realize that this is what gives you valuable IP in the present context, in our present framework. But for tomorrow, if you allow artificial intelligence and machine learning to take on the role of an inventor, we are going to be in a totally different scenario there, where the very statutory tenets, I would say the most fundamental tenets or the statutory frameworks of the patent laws or IP laws in various territories would have to be rewritten or I would say recalibrated. So in such a situation, we would have to think about what is it that is going to hold out, what is IP value from a virtual scenario. You look at a real world you understand what IP value is because we have got real-time solutions. In a virtual world, what are the problems that are going to be solved? And how far is industry? Because we talk about industry 4.0, how is industry gearing itself up to address these challenges? That's going to be a primary question because IP is not a standalone instrument. When you look at next time or next generation industry problems, the first question to ask as an IP professional is, how far is our IP instrumentality competent to protect the solutions of tomorrow? Okay. If the answer is no, they are not competent, then the next question is, how do we make them competent? Do we amend our frameworks? Do we amend our substantive and procedural frameworks to ensure that the IP instruments are recalibrated to impart value for futuristic technologies, even technologies where there is no human intervention at all? Where there is intervention only from artificial intelligence, you have got a different persona, okay, addressing these inventions and addressing R&D problems, who participate in the lab, and where humans are going to be obliterated. That is it. Okay, these are the basic questions to ask. Okay, being an IP professional, okay, that is all I can give you as an answer to this question for the immediate person. We would need to see how industry evolves here and what are the set of paradigms that industry seeks to imbibe when it comes to addressing futuristic technologies and IP creation, protection, and enforcement. Okay, leave alone monetization for futuristic technologies. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your wonderful and engaging keynote session, I must say. And once again, on behalf of Team MIT University, we wish you happy World IP Day. And we are looking forward to receiving your guidance in future also. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you so much, sir. That was mind-boggling indeed. I must say that this is the perfect beginning of celebrating World IP Day with such an insightful session by you at this National Intellectual Property Convention 2022. You've put forth the importance of IP, especially for the youth, considering new technologies, new markets, and new business models in such a lucid and informative manner. So thank you so much for that. It's so important to understand that IP offers protection to inventions and technologies, acting as a deterrent to competitors, becomes a market driver, and is also the key factor in growth index of organizations. As you have appropriately outlined the life cycle of IP value, answering carefully the crucial questions which you had shared earlier will definitely help our participants secure copyrights or trademarks, trade secrets, or patents in the most effective way. Valuing your invention not only without the thorough background check is something which should be done with good market study also, considering the merits, shortfalls, challenges, strengths, and utilities. One of the most important pieces of advice I'm sure our budding entrepreneurs here should take home today. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again for your valuable time and deliberations, and we look forward to many more such informative sessions from you. Seriously, I believe one session is not enough with the plethora of information that you have given. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure with the MIT ADT, with you, Suraj Boyer and the team. I really look forward to connecting with you again in real time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And all the wishes to you for the World IP Day. Thank you, sir.